Good morning, everybody. 360 Performance here. Dr. Whiteman coming at you on a Friday, every Friday at 11 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. It's going to be a great show today. I feel good about it. I'm excited because I think we're going to have this huge, just crescendo of emotions with great facts and insights. Today, I'm really excited about today's show. So welcome. Let's start off with our mindset moment. Our mindset moment this week goes something like this. Nothing that grieves us can be called little, but the external laws of proportion, a child's loss of a doll and a king's loss of a crown, are events of the same size. Because grief is grief, so says Mark Twain. It's always interesting to me how so many years ago, so wonderful quotes have been made that relate timelessly to the future and what's going on, and Mark Twain is one of those soothsayers, one of those storytellers that brings us insights. And this week's mindset moment is right on target from Mark Twain, because grief is grief. It doesn't matter what the event is that causes it, nor should the person be berated or diminished because they are grieving about something or someone that may not be of the same consequence as it is to you. Because grief is grief, whether it's a child's doll or a king's crown. It's really, I just really revel in that. And that is our theme today, looking at the differences between failure and loss. And I used the picture today in promoting today's show about the huge winter surf coming into a beach on the west coast of Kona, on the Kona side of the big island of Hawaii. And it just was wonderful, I mean, magnificent. But as you can tell, in any surf, you've got to be cautious because failure could turn into loss. The failure of your stroke, the failure of your ability to handle the movement of the waves and the strength of those waves could be regretfully turned into a loss. So I felt that was appropriate imagery for today's show. But there are differences. There are differences between I failed at something and I lost something. A loss is one element of feeling, as is failure creating another set of feelings. We're going to talk about that a little bit and investigate more about loss and failure and what are the differences. But before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about what's going on in the next few weeks, next few days for that matter. We're right in the middle of the National Football League draft. That's one big thing that's going on. Mother's Day is coming on May the 8th. I'm always reminded, because I'm an agricultural centered kid, when I was younger, my mom and my dad would always have me out there in the garden. We had a 1-acre garden, for crying out loud. And my mom would say to me, remember, May showers bring May flowers. And I go, well, okay, Mom, whatever, as a young man. And now as a mature adult, grandfather, father of two, I can relate to that statement a little bit more practically than I did when I was a kid. And I regretted hearing her say it because it always meant I was going to go out and pull weeds. I was going to cultivate the rows between the vegetables and the corn, and I guess they're all vegetables. But whatever my mom was growing, tomatoes, it was truly a vegetable garden, I guess. We had some flowers here and there, but my mom was more of a vegetables person. So that's also in the offing through the month of May. The question still remains, will Tiger play in the PGA Championship? Apparently he's making gestures towards that. And what I mean by gestures, I mean he's practicing. He's out there and nearby the course to get himself prepared. But with the injuries that he sustained, as we saw in the Masters, he did okay. When I say okay, I mean he finished, he played, he qualified, he finished. But not to the historic Tiger level of scoring and competition. But just being out there so soon after that major accident was miraculous. Perhaps in a metaphorical sort of way, May showers will bring May flowers for Tiger Woods in the form of a PGA Championship qualification. And you know, who knows? You know, the game of golf is very fickle. It's very, very fickle. But glad, excuse me, glad to be here, sharing with you today. We're going to use the NFL draft as a backdrop, a metaphor, if you will, for our theme today, failure and loss, and what are the differences. And one of those potential failures and losses is within the hands of those 300 plus, I call them candidates. They're players, they're football players, college players that got invited to the combine. Now that number gets larger as you look at the pro days all across the country, and now it's actually globally. You've got kids in all the different countries around the world that are looking at the NFL dream. They're not part of the NFL draft. It's typically the young men that went to the combine, showed their skill sets and their ability to understand the game with coaches, as well as their physical prowess on the playing field down there in Indianapolis. So now here we are, NFL draft out there in Vegas, and there are some number ones in the first round of the draft. And what does that really mean? And how do you really know if a number one pick has number one output? Do you really? I'm sure for those of you who followed the NFL and the NFL draft over the years, many quarterbacks touted as number ones, number one qualifiers, number one pick in the first round of the draft. They didn't necessarily give us number one output. That's a question. And so then I asked this question: is their failure a loss? Now, to the executives at the NFL franchise, heck yeah, it's money. We committed this money to get results that they didn't know how to even measure. The NFL scouts, executives, when they put down their choice, their selection for the draft, for that number one in the first round, they don't know what that output's going to be. Is it loss or development then when you have that failure in that number one? Do you just say, oh, well, write it off, put them in the practice squad, see if they survive, or do you develop? Is the process of going from a rookie, albeit a college athlete, an excellent college athlete, moving forward into the pros, once that's done, your development training is over with? Well, the obvious answer is no, it's not. But the difference is, it's your responsibility as the player. You are the one who participates. You are the one who makes the decision to get up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and make sure you're being seen by coaches and your veteran player teammates as being out there wanting to get it done and move it forward. So I've got some questions. We'll see if we can come up with some answers. As we progress, understand here's our perspective and the excitement, and it should be, for all intents and purposes, for the drama, the glamour, the show, the party. It should be in Vegas. But the last in-person NFL draft was in Nashville. I was there, 2019. Wonderful time, walking up and down Broadway, seeing the fans and their kids in strollers, toddlers, celebrating up and down Broadway in Nashville, Tennessee on April 26th. We came back and we shared with you some of our knowledge and excitement for being down there. But now, we're in person is here. We're back. It's ready to go. And with that, as I said, the last one was in Nashville. Now we're in Vegas. Yesterday, today, and through the weekend, aligning college elite athletes, college elite football athletes, to posture. Well, actually, it's a finish. They're finishing what they've done, and they're posturing themselves as players and proving to scouts and executives at the NFL franchise level they're worth the money. But once again, there's no guarantee of the output is number one. But we're in Vegas. It's a fun time, and I'm excited just to see the progression, because rookie camp's coming. There's transition times there. We'll talk a little bit about that as it relates to identifying number one output from those high draft choices that the NFL executives are going to, open their checkbooks and put it down to hope that they get that number one output from that number one draft choice. So with that being said, what about the transition? Does college success translate to NFL success? Now, if you're looking at the picture, and I'll explain it to those who are not able to see the video, there's a young man in this picture hoisting the trophy, great emotional expression on his face. It looks like happiness, excitement, exhilaration, along with his teammates that surround him as they hoist the trophy up for and this happens to be the trophy for the CSU-CU game that happens at the beginning of every season. And that's Rashard Hollywood Higgins that's got that wonderful expression, number 82, who's now with the Panthers. And he was with the Cleveland Browns. I really appreciated his remarks in his tweet to the Cleveland fans, franchise, and his teammates, and how grateful he was for what they did for him in getting him acclimated to the league, bringing him forward through his transitions, and transforming him from a college athlete to a professional athlete. And he was a combine kid. He went to the combine. He went to the Senior Bowl tournaments that they have prior to the combine, and he's proven himself well. He's done quite well as an NFL pro. The question still remains, though: does the college success translate to NFL success? Looking at Rashard Higgins, yes, the answer is, but that's not a guarantee. And it's after the fact that I can comfortably say yes. Rashard knows. He knew going in. And he delivered. Therein lies a whole other set of questions about the difference between failure and loss. Rashard Higgins will admit openly, as he has done to myself and others, that there is failure. And it's what you do with that experience that determines whether it goes to a loss of a contract, a loss of a game, loss of a friendship. There's lots of different losses, and I want to make sure that's clearly understood. When we say words sometimes, we don't look at the specific references in the definition of that word. We just globalize it. We take a big brush and paint everything with that term or phrase. In this case, I want to make sure we are clearly focused on the different levels of failure, the different degrees and levels of loss, so that even as the Mark Twain quote states, whether it's the loss of a doll or the crown of the king, the grieving process in those losses is the same. And it's unique to every individual. So there's no guarantee that you can measure the output from college success to pro success as it relates to football. Nor can you be absolutely sure about the consequences of your behavior and whether it will deliver loss, failure, success, or something in between all those. We'll keep talking about that. Now, going back to the draft more specifically, I listed several of the athletes that are being touted by CBS Sports as the best prospects available after round one for sure. Excuse me. Because throughout that entire first round draft, lots of jockeying going on. Teams trading their choices, other teams asking for, hey, give me a step up. We want to go up higher in the draft in that first round. We'll do this for you. We'll trade players that we currently have, as well as future draft choices in the draft going forward. Well, all that being said, once again, there's no guarantee. It's a game. Now, it's a game that's necessary. It's a structure that's necessary so that we have some semblance of structure and framework to go through all of these 300-plus candidates that are in the draft, some of which, by the way, there are some that are in the draft that didn't necessarily attend the combine because they had their pro day. So there's athletes in here. And there will be more trading going on once this formal draft is over. But CBS Sports said, okay, look, you did all this jockeying, but come on. Take a look at the players that are now left still to be selected from schools like Georgia and Clemson, Central Michigan. And it's really interesting to me how the player quality is getting less and less directly related to the institution they played for. Like the linebacker from Georgia, Nakobe Dean. He is an outstanding player. Now, I don't know what differentiated him to have, and he may have felt it was a loss, or a failure perhaps, but better put, maybe a failure that he's now still out there waiting to be called, waiting for the phone to ring and have the executives from an NFL franchise call him and say, we would like to pick you at this level, at this round of the draft. Well, with that being said, when you get that phone call, or you have felt, whether it's the football draft or it's something else in your life, you felt failure, and it turned into a loss, or you felt loss, and there was aspects of that loss that you saw that you failed at. Oh gosh, if I would have only done this differently, I wouldn't have lost that. And maybe there was, yeah, I've got the failure. I feel like I failed myself, my teammates, my family, whatever the case may be based on the incident that you're experiencing, and are grateful in that failure that it didn't turn out to a loss. It wasn't a loss of friendship, a life, money, or maybe perhaps all of the above. But in either case, let's make sure we have an attitude check. When you're feeling loss, who defines that? It should be you. You are the one who defines that loss, not someone else. Scouts, CBS reporters in the sports department are saying, here are some winners and some losers. They've also made lists of schools that lost in the NFL franchises that have lost in the first round because of the decisions they made. Heck, they even extended into the virtual football scene and said that Aaron Rodgers was a loser because he didn't get a wide receiver from the draft. And that's going to impact his fantasy football status in the virtual football world. Who's defining this? There's no guarantee of the outcome until it happens. So we have to have an attitude check. And as we live life and continue to move forward, and we suffer failures, error, losses, we also should be mindful of adapting and adjusting, making sure that that loss or failure is not so overwhelming that you lose sight of who you are. So within that adjusting and adapting, there's an admission, prior to failure and loss even happening, that it's possible. And if it's possible and you're aware of that, you've admitted it, you own that admission, you prepare, or you should prepare. Maybe it's too scary. Maybe that, oh my gosh, that loss is so scary, I don't know if I want to prepare for that. Well, managing the loss and the scary feelings that may come with it are much more manageable if you put some thought into what does it look like, what will it feel like, so that you set up the culture you live and work in a way that you are able to deal with that failure and manage that failure. We'll talk a little bit more about that. You will also define your success. In addition to identifying what are the moments where you fail or you lose, you also are in charge of defining those guidelines, frameworks, and parameters that define your success. These young men that I listed here with the CBS Sports prospect list, somebody else selected them. They're in charge of defining their success. They should not feel diminished or berated at all just because somebody put their name on a list or didn't put their name on a list. They are in charge of defining their success. Their preparation should be in alignment with that definition for success. Because if in fact you do lose something or someone, or you fail at doing what you believe is your best effort, but again, there's no guarantee. A best effort doesn't necessarily mean the prescribed results are the outcome. So there's a grieving process that you need to define. If in fact you suffer loss and failure within that loss, you are the one that defines how you're going to handle it. The grieving process. I've learned recently it's very important to have a grieving process, to work through it and manage it effectively. Now, as I say that, I want to just make sure I remind everybody of a couple things. May showers do bring May flowers. Despite the fact that we are globally suffering climate change. Not always guaranteed we'll have any showers, or if we do have showers, that it's enough to sufficiently nurture those Mayflowers. That's important for me to say to you at this time because we have so many avenues that we can travel down in pursuit of defining our successes, defining our losses, and defining the grieving processes that we ultimately need to put in play to recover, to adapt, and to adjust. The most effective, I don't want to say it that way, the most damaging, emotional loss that one could suffer is that of a loved one. And I'll qualify the degree of the term loved one by meaning friend, family member, lover, somebody you've exchanged experiences, emotions, and events together that when they're gone, you will miss them. You will think of them fondly. That's the extreme. As we move away from that extreme and back it down into other degrees of loss, other degrees of failure, it could be as simple as what Mark Twain said, the loss of a doll, of a child. It's not a big deal. It's a toy. But to that person, it's a big deal. They need grieving. Parents out there, have you ever had the hamster die and you had a funeral? The hamster gets a coffin. You take that cereal box and its cardboard shell and you make a coffin out of it and you decorate it. And it's a process. It's necessary to manage those emotions, regardless of the item or person that you've lost. A grieving process needs to be there. You need to define it. At the team level, we're talking about the metaphor I'm using today of the NFL draft out there in wonderful Las Vegas, Nevada. As they say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So you can be assured there's some partying going on before the choices have even been made, because it's Vegas. So family and friends, I'm sure, have collected in great numbers to go out to Vegas to celebrate. Whether or not the contract that was offered was the one that was requested, which could, in fact, in that situation, be perceived as failure. Oh my gosh, I wanted to play for the Broncos, and I got the Detroit Lions. That can be perceived as a failure, perhaps. Doesn't stop you from partying in Las Vegas. Any number of these candidates that are up for a chance in the NFL through any of the number of rounds and at whatever numerical position in that round they get chosen, there needs to be a process for handling all of that. The success, the failure, the loss, it needs to be handled and managed. I challenge you to give me your method for handling your grief when it doesn't quite go your way. Are you a whiner? I would say those of us who are whiners, we don't have a process for grieving, because that's why we're whining. Let me take a pause just for a minute. And I know there's a lot of people out there that love Starbucks, but today I have one of my favorites. I discovered this. This is a honey citrus mint tea, and it's really, really good. And I had this dry throat this morning, and I said, gosh, caffeine's not going to do it, because if you don't already know this, caffeine dries stuff out. Oh my gosh, that's really good. That is really good. Thank you, Starbucks, for making that concoction. I want to think that it was just for me. Because if it's not, if I can't think that way and it's not true, that could be a failure. I could have lost my own self-esteem, my own loss of creative juices right here, but I'm just messing with you here. But it sure is good. It's really good. So, as we move on this morning, remember that you're listening to 360 Performance on KUHS, streaming to you every day. It's amazing the power of the streaming forces that are out there, and KUHS is one of the top streaming forces out there. But as I say that, I'm reminded of this particular statement from Edward Deming. Now, Edward Deming, I studied him for years because he's a quality person, quality in performance. And one of the key things that is part of my whole practice, my whole method of engaging people and organizations is from this statement. If you do not know how to ask the right question, you discover nothing. To me, that's essential for setting up your definition of success, your definition of failure, so you can prepare against it, but knowing that it's inevitable. There's going to be error and change and failure. You need to know how to prepare for that. And to do that, asking the right questions could be a good discovery method. And Edward Deming goes back as far as World War II, where he was engaged by the Army Corps of Engineers to come in and help their methods and strategies be discovered and implemented in the recovery of Japan. Remember, we dropped a nuclear bomb on them, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, in case you didn't remember that, or maybe you did have somebody tell you in your history class, but just didn't stick. And your success, the success of our future, is managed by our failures and loss. And Deming was one of those that got involved in managing that loss for the Japanese. Some might have said that was a failure by the U.S. government in doing what they did. But others, historians perhaps, politicians, leaders in our world at that time, might have said we didn't have another choice, and we're going to prepare for that loss and the possibility of our own failure as humanity. Well, Mr. Deming was part of it, and I really like his statement about asking the right question so you can discover what is right. And in that process of discovery, Mr. Deming also discovered the grieving process and how essential it was for the citizens of the nation of Japan and what it took to recover from that. Now, I bring this up because the degree of emotions that happen during any given loss or failure are really about the individual. So I'm going to ask you again to consider, if you're observing failure and loss, look into this at this almost the cellular level. Look at the individuals that are in that scene, that are participating and experiencing the loss or failure at varying degrees. Here's my example to that. A running back takes a handoff from a quarterback. He hits the line at a great neck speed at a gap he thinks and hopes is there based on the way they've executed it in practice. But for some reason, there's a failure at the line. And the gap in the line is not what he anticipated it to be based on the practice that has been happening in the weeks prior to the game. So he's got to deal with a defensive player in the gap quicker than he expected, So there's already degrees of failure that running back has nothing to do with. And until that running back gets tackled, he doesn't have a true sense of the degree of failure that he is going to now participate in. What does he do? Heck, does he even have time to grieve? It's moment to moment, right? Lightning speed, seconds go by. Transitions, maybe it was the loss of a first down. So now it's done for that series, and that running back needs to go to the sideline and lick his or their wounds. Perhaps he's going to say something to the offensive line. The grieving process. Now, you might not have thought, grieving process? What is he talking about? Come on, coach. It's a football game, for crying out loud. It's not a grieving process. Well, need I remind you of Mark Twain's quote? It doesn't matter if it's a child's doll or the crown on a king. It is grief. You can call it whatever other thing you want to call it, but if you don't name it properly for the moment, you will not ask the right questions and thereby discover nothing. You'll go sit down with the offensive team while the defense is doing their job, waiting for your turn to get back in there, hoping it's sooner, not later. But you got to recover. That's recovery, called a grieving process. It's a strategy. It's resiliency. There's lots of different words that are associated with a process. In this case, resiliency is associated with this process of recovery or grief. So, as I keep saying the word grief, what are you thinking about? Oh, death, maybe. Because grief tends to be associated, that word, grieving processes, grief, associated with death. Ends. It's done. I can't take it back. I don't get anything back. That's why it's so powerful as an emotional descriptor, because it's grief. It quickly gets people to a place of reflection about, yeah, grief, man, that's tough stuff. But grief happens in all kinds of degrees. That's why I said earlier, loss is not just one brush you paint with. It's many different levels, considerate of the situation and the people that it applies to, just like failure. Is failure in card games the same as failure in football? Well, no, not from a gamesmanship standpoint. I don't know that anybody's ever tackled someone playing, rummy or bridge. Not a lot of broken bones or contusions in the game of bridge compared to the game of football. But is there failure in both? Is there a loss in both? Absolutely. Is the degree of the loss in a bridge game equal to the grieving process of the death of a family member? Well, absolutely not. They're different degrees, but it's still the process of grieving. It's really interesting to consider all those different degrees of loss, failure, and some, because of the environment that they're in, I'm not thinking about anything but just having fun. And as the picture I put up here now, for those of you who can see it, this is a young man who has been drafted. He's got the franchise team hat on his head. He's got family and friends around him. And he's ready to partay. Because it's Vegas, baby. We are in Vegas. Have to do that. There's going to be a lot of that going on. As there will be people having a beverage, thinking about what could have been if I only would have done this. Well, if it would have gone this way, I would have gotten that. Well, what ifs are great for the planning process, but what ifs are not necessarily a good fit in that attitude adjustment you need to make when you're feeling loss or failure, because you might linger there. The woe is me. You might become a little whiny. Well, you've got to make a decision about when's the time for me to get over it and move on and continue the process. Well, but you're in Las Vegas, for crying out loud. It's the 2022 draft. The last one in person was in 2019. Good times, by the way. Awesome time in Nashville. As it will be in Las Vegas the rest of this weekend. But as I say that, I want to make sure that when you look at celebration, that you celebrate in each moment that arrives to you. So as you see it coming, just imagine, because you're imagining it's arriving to this moment, I'm in it, the moment is coming to me. People, energy, it's arriving to me. As that happens, see it all. Consider that I'm in Vegas, that's my environment I'm in. It's a party town. A lot of great colors and shapes and people, and the event itself, it's the NFL draft in Las Vegas. But remember that there's going to come a moment where you need to gather it all up and move on to the next level. Level up. But celebrate each moment as it arrives. So as you head to the plane and your seat on that plane to go to the next step in your journey of being an NFL player, you celebrate that too. Because you only get one shot at every moment that arrives to do it the way you want to have it done. For me, that's the first step you should take in planning how to succeed, planning for the eventual outcomes of potential failures and the degree of that failure, as well as being aware that loss is also part of the journey. Take each moment, celebrate it as it arrives. Even when it doesn't seem like you're standing in Vegas, because now you're just sitting in the airplane seat that was assigned to you, heading to the next step in your journey. Celebrate in that. Have a smile on your face about how great it is to be in the place you're at in that moment you're in it. All right. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our journey today and the metaphor we're using on defining the differences between loss and failure and what that means to people and how we can prepare better for our successes, our failures, and our loss. And for some of it's, depending on the degree of the loss, that could be a grieving process. My message to you today is any loss or failure you have, there's going to be some form of your grieving process you're going to apply. You may not call it grieving process, but you want to get over it. You want to be resilient. You know, you poke that Pillsbury Doughboy, you want it to pop back pretty quick. Be resilient and pop back quick. So as I say that, I'm reminded of how great it is to be part of this wonderful community here at KUHS, streaming every day of the week. On Fridays, we're grateful for the opportunity to be here with Hefe Henry and the group. We've got a lot of wonderful things going on here and hope to continue with those. But streaming is one of the best things that happens here. Did I tell you that I'm in 8 countries? That just blows my mind. 8 different countries. That's really something. If you have a question for me, or you have a statement or a thought that you want to share that with me at 360mindset.com. That's our home for 360 Performance. If you have a thought, just give us a shout, write down your comments, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So, moving on. One of the things that we're talking about here is the grief that we feel in loss. Well, recently, right around, it almost seems appropriate that the Easter holiday is part of my metaphor today, because a young man that has a wonderful family, wonderful friends, and career passed away after his fight with cancer. His name was Adam Lewis. And I don't think of the deaths that have come into my life of friends and family as them being gone, as there being a change in how I will address them, how I will remember them, and the same is true with Adam Lewis. He had just a zest for having fun, especially as an athlete, a high school athlete that I had an opportunity to coach, a college athlete, and then as a competitor professionally, competing as an engineer, loving the college and the engineer academic achievements that he had, in college, and then having and delivering a wonderful family experience. Adam, as this picture shows here, I put up, Adam and I were at a playoff game with the Milwaukee Brewers that one of his high school classmates he played basketball with, Curtis Granderson, was on that team. And we had the opportunity to share with each other a moment in the stands, sharing some big smiles. As I said to you earlier, and using my remembrance of Adam as a way to talk more about grief is essential. I've said it to audiences before about being in touch with yourself and vulnerable enough to know that crying and emoting those emotions that help you fulfill your grief process, those are the elements that are so essential, because it's that energy that you want to manage and position in a place that doesn't debilitate you, that doesn't stop you from being the best of who you are. And that requires clarity. So whether it's by yourself in moments of meditation or reflection, get clarity as to the degree of loss you're feeling. For me, I'm smiling. I have a desire to be around kids because of the childlike behavior that Adam routinely, jokingly, playfully demonstrated. He was the biggest kid in his family at 6'9". And his kids will, anytime I see them, will always get a great set of stories about how wonderful their dad is. But that's clarity. That's delivering messages that speak to the process of understanding your emotions and moving through it, as are having stable relationships around you. Gather around those that are like-minded, maybe shared memories with the person that you lost, person or thing that you've lost, and making sure that in that sustainability that you're honoring the memory and experiences you had in a way that is fulfilling and moving you forward, reveling in those experiences, so that in that moment of being honorable to that person, that you bring out how strong and resilient you are for not only yourself, but for the others that are around you. It's been a wonderful experience for me to share with family and friends who didn't know Adam, because they saw something on my face about where my head's at. And as I move forward, I'm going to gather his teammates together in Chicago next week. I'm going to be at the Boys and Girls Clubs National Conference, Boys and Girls Clubs of America National Conference, where there'll be guest speakers. Irvin Magic Johnson will be there, one of the greatest voices for Boys and Girls Clubs. Is Denzel Washington. I believe he's actually got a title of ambassador for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. And Denzel speaks out often about what the Boys and Girls Clubs meant to him, and helping him become the professional, the artist, the community advocate that he is for he and his family. So we're going to go out there and participate in that, as well as get those teammates together in Chicago, where we in TF South High School is where Adam played basketball with Curtis Granderson, Mike Holba, Billy Liebeter, P.Y., Paul Young Jr., and others. It was just great. It's going to be great to just see them and share the stories and move the process forward, and make sure that they are doing what they need to do for themselves to create a process. So there's where I'm gonna pause and talk about other elements of the process as well. And those are, boy, they're essential, because in my world of performance consulting, as a mental performance coach, anytime there's a person or thing that is influencing you, that takes you away from optimizing your ability to be you, that's when close consideration of a process needs to be had. Reflecting on it, renewing yourself to those processes and the commitments you made to apply your energy to those processes so that you can, as quickly as possible, as resiliently as possible, get back to who you are and when it represents the best of who you are. So in looking at the extremes I said earlier is loss of an individual, a family member, a death in the family, a death in the network of people that you connect with. That's the ultimate grieving moment. But as we've talked about, the differences between loss and failure are the degree with which it is in existence, your plan on how to deal with that, your definition of success so that you know what to look forward to once you've gone through the grieving process and continue on. Now, depending on the circumstances of the environment, you may need to be faster at getting through that process than in other situations. But whatever that amount of time is, you're the one who knows what it needs to do because you've defined it. You know what the steps are and how long it will take for you to get through it. That's a given. If you've applied yourself in defining your success parameters, defining under what conditions is there potential for loss. Well, that means you're looking at your skill set and saying, you know, boy, I'm not the fastest person in the world, so I need to really be aware of how I fake, you know, how I maybe posture myself in front of a defensive player, or how I posture myself at the plate, given a pitcher who throws good off-speed outside third pitches, because those are weak spots, and more than likely they may know about that. So what am I going to do to give myself the greatest chance possible to address that, deal with it, and work through it? Those are all parts of your plan for success, with the understanding you know there's a chance for failure and loss. That's part of the process. Once again, the tea is awesome. But the dry throat, that's problematic. I'm working through the loss. Sharing a little bit of my sarcasm with you. KUHS is streaming to you 24/7, doing the things that we need to do to make sure you have great rhythms and music to lighten your day, but at the same time, listen to the wonderful talk that we have here, that we bring to your attention every week, the least of which is me. I mean, every Friday, 11 a.m., go figure, 360 Performance. Next week, as I said, we're going to be in Chicago. We're going to bring you some moments from the streets. We're going to bring you some moments, working on it. I got my fingers crossed, talking to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America to see if I can have a few moments with Magic Johnson, Irving Magic Johnson, and Denzel Washington, just to get their perspective of what the Boys and Girls Club means to them and how they supported their processes for performance and defining their success measurements and how they would plan for success, as well as preparing for the inevitable change that could bring failure and loss to them. I just know from watching theatrical people on stage or in front of the cameras or on the big screen as they prepare for releasing a movie that there's a constant there of understanding there's failure. Error and failure is going to happen, and we might also lose some things. So we have to have backups and strategies and thought processes to anticipate those things. So it's not unique to sports. It's not unique to sports at all. So that's what we're going to be bringing to you next week. And I will be bringing that to you. Gosh, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to be live via Zoom, but Henry and I will work that out. So stay tuned for that. And then the week after that, we're going to be bringing you some, well, I'm hoping we're going to bring you some agricultural-centered kinds of thoughts about gardening. Because even though I'm a farm kid, we are going to bring you some thoughts about nutrition and gardening. So I'm hoping that my colleague, Nikki Burnett, will help me with that. She has just a wonderful backyard garden. I'm hoping to get some film for you. We'll show you some video on the show in 2 weeks about the performance process necessary for success in gardening. Not everybody's got a green thumb. I know a few people whose thumbs are brown. And we want to keep them away from, other than watering stuff, but kind of keep them away from the growing process. But we're gonna, in 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I've got to get my confirmation with Nikki Burnett to help me out with that a little bit. The winter months are over, I hope. You know, you never know. May and June, you can still have cold temps, maybe some slushy white stuff that gets on your trees and knocks off the blossoms that are there and delays your ability to put those delicate vegetable plants in your raised garden. And I say that because that's what I do. And the raised garden is because of the vermin that are out there. You know, the squirrels and the bunny rabbits and any number of birds that might visit your delicate, tender stalked lettuce and tomato plants. Put them out too early and they get the weather, and the animals will get them. So that's kind of my review for preparing you for the next couple of weeks. And getting ready for our close for today, I want to make sure that you understand our theme was about the differences between loss and failure. I can fail at not winning a race. I didn't run fast enough. I lost the race, but I failed at preparing myself well enough to have the speed necessary to win the race, to have the success that I had defined for myself. So you've got all those pieces to review, and that